The lie I miss the most is the smell of our house on a Sunday afternoon. It was a carefully crafted thing, a scent built from layers of my mother's devotion. It started with the deep, savory perfume of a roasting chicken, seasoned with rosemary and thyme from the little terracotta pots on the windowsill. That smell would wind its way out of the kitchen, through the hallway, and curl around the rich, woody scent of my father's lemon oil polish that he used on the mahogany dining table every single Saturday without fail. It was the smell of stability. It was the smell of a family that was solid, a family that had its traditions, a family that was safe. I can't smell lemon oil anymore without my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. That last peaceful Sunday, the air was particularly thick with the illusion of contentment. A late autumn rain was whispering against the window panes, a soft, rhythmic patter that made the warmth inside feel like a fortress. The light filtering through the glass was gray and gentle, casting long, soft shadows that made the familiar corners of our living room seem mysterious and deep. I was curled up in the old armchair, the one with the velvet worn smooth in the shape of a person, a half-read book resting on my chest. I could hear the low murmur of the football game on the television, a sound so intrinsically linked to my father's presence that it was like a second heartbeat in the house. He was in his leather recliner, the springs groaning in a familiar way as he shifted his weight. I could hear the soft rustle of the newspaper as my mother turned a page at the dining table, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her. Its faint apple and honey sent a gentle counterpoint to the powerful aroma of the roast. And then there was Chloe, my sister. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, not relaxing into it, but sitting as if she were about to bolt. The blue light of her phone cast an eerie, flickering glow on her face, making her cheekbones sharp and her eyes look like dark, hollow pools. The frantic, almost silent tapping of her thumbs on the screen was the only sound that felt out of place. It was a nervous, agitated rhythm, like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. For months, she had been like this, distant, coiled, living more in that glowing little rectangle than here with us. We'd all tried to draw her out, but it was like trying to catch smoke. She'd offer a tight, fleeting smile, her eyes never quite meeting ours, before retreating back into her digital world. We told ourselves it was a phase. She was 22, trying to figure things out. We gave her space. We thought we were being kind. What a stupid, catastrophic mistake that was. The next day, the world tilted on its axis. I was at work, sitting at my desk, the air smelling of sterilized air conditioning and burnt coffee. My phone buzzed on the smooth, cool surface of my desk. It was a message from my friend, Sarah. All it said was, "Anna, is this you? I'm so sorry if it is, but I thought you had to know." Below it was a link. My heart gave a strange little lurch, a premonition of dread that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I clicked on it. The website was called The Gilded Cage. It was stark and minimalist, black text on a white background. The title of the latest post screamed at me from the screen. Chapter 3, The Patriarch's Paper Empire. My breath caught in my throat. I started to read. The words were written by someone who called herself Sparrow. And Sparrow wrote about a family. A father who projected an image of immense success, who polished his mahogany dining table every Saturday, but whose import-export business was a house of cards, propped up by secret loans and desperate, whispered phone calls late at night. She wrote about the sound of his pacing in his study after midnight, the floorboards groaning under the weight of his fear. She described the scent of his sweat, a sharp, metallic odor of panic that he tried to cover with expensive cologne. My blood went cold. It was my father. It was our house. The details were too specific, too intimate. The groaning floorboard outside his study. The brand of his cologne. The mahogany table. I felt a wave of nausea, so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. I kept scrolling, my hand trembling. I found Chapter 2, The Matriarch's Porcelain Smile. It described a mother who baked rosemary chicken every Sunday, who tended her herb garden with hands that were secretly gnarled with pain. It talked about her quiet, graceful composure being a mask for a debilitating autoimmune disease she'd hidden from her children for over a decade, about the small, foil-wrapped packets of pills hidden at the back of her lingerie drawer, about the faint, medicinal smell that sometimes clung to her clothes. I could almost smell it as I read, a ghost of a scent I'd never been able to place, but now recognized with a sickening lurch of clarity. Then I found Chapter 1, Sister Dearest. It was about two sisters. One was the golden child, the responsible one, the one who did everything right. The other was the shadow, the afterthought, the one who saw everything because no one ever really looked at her. It was a portrait of me, painted with strokes of resentment so bitter they made the words on the screen seem to warp and twist. It mentioned the time I'd won the academic scholarship, and Chloe had gotten a tattoo of a dead bird on her wrist the next day, an act the author painted not as teenage rebellion, but as a desperate scream for attention that no one in the family even bothered to hear. It was all there. Our lives, filleted and served up for public consumption, seasoned with a venom I had never known existed. At the bottom of each post was a small button that said support the author, and a link to a payment platform. People were paying her for this. They were paying her to destroy us. I don't remember driving home. It was like I was floating outside my own body, watching myself move through the motions. The sound of the tires on the wet pavement was a dull roar in my ears. The air in my car felt thick and suffocating. When I burst through the front door of our house, the smell of lemon polish and leftover roast chicken hit me like a physical blow. It was the scent of the lie. Chloe was in the kitchen, casually making a sandwich, the knife scraping against the ceramic plate with a sound that set my teeth on edge. She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a small smear of mayonnaise on her lip. "Hey," she said, her voice deceptively light. "You're home early." I couldn't speak. I just held out my phone, my hand shaking so violently the screen was a blur. "What is this, Chloe?" My voice came out as a ragged whisper, raw and broken. "What did you do?" She glanced at the phone, her eyes scanning the screen. For a single, fleeting moment, I saw a flash of something in her expression. It might have been fear. It might have been shame. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a hard, defiant mask. She shrugged, turning back to her sandwich as if we were discussing the weather. "It's a story," she said, her voice cold and flat. "I'm a writer now. That's what writers do. They write what they know." "A writer?" The words exploded out of me, a strangled cry of disbelief. The sound was too loud in the quiet kitchen. "You put our family on the internet for strangers to read. You told them about Dad's business. About Mom's about her health." The last words were choked with a sob I couldn't hold back. The air was thick with the smell of toasted bread and my own rising panic. I could feel a cold sweat prickling my hairline. "Oh, so you finally know about that?" she said, her voice dripping with a cruel, mocking sort of pity. "Good. Maybe now you'll all stop treating her like she's made of glass and you're the perfect, helpful daughter." She took a deliberate, slow bite of her sandwich, chewing with an infuriating calm. The small, wet sound of it was an obscenity. "How could you?" I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a hollow, aching grief. "They're our parents. This will destroy them. This will destroy everything." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes as hard and cold as river stones. "What's to destroy, Anna? This perfect little dollhouse? This life that's been choking me since the day I was born? It's all a lie anyway. All I did was write down the truth. And for the first time in my life, people are actually listening to me. They see me, and they're paying me for it." She gestured with her sandwich, a triumphant, ugly gesture. "Turns out our family secrets are worth quite a bit." I stared at her, at the stranger wearing my sister's face. The smell of the house, the smells I had always associated with love and safety, now seemed like the cloying, sweet scent of decay. I realized then that the fortress I had imagined on that rainy Sunday wasn't a fortress at all. It was a prison, and my own sister was the one who had just handed the whole world the key. I stumbled back out of the kitchen, the sound of her chewing following me down the hall, each crunch a new crack splintering the foundation of our lives. The days that followed were a blur of suffocating tension. I didn't tell our parents. I couldn't. How do you tell the people who raised you, who gave you everything, that their own daughter has betrayed them in the most public and cruel way imaginable? So I walked around in a state of suspended horror, waiting for the explosion. The house felt different. The air was heavy, charged with unspoken things. Every time the phone rang, my heart would hammer against my ribs. Every conversation felt like I was navigating a minefield, terrified of saying something that might lead them to the truth. Chloe and I existed in a state of Cold War. We moved around each other like ghosts, the silence between us a living, breathing entity, thick with accusation and her simmering resentment. I'd hear her in her room at night, the rapid-fire tapping of her keyboard a constant, sickening reminder of what she was doing. She was writing more. She was feeding the monster she had created, one devastating secret at a time. The blog was gaining traction. I'd check it obsessively, my stomach churning with dread. The comments section was a viper's nest of speculation and morbid curiosity. Strangers were piecing things together, gossiping about the fallen patriarch, and the tragic, secretive matriarch. They were praising Sparrow's bravery and honesty. They loved her for tearing us apart. The first real crack appeared about a week later. My father came home from work early. I knew something was wrong the moment he walked through the door. Usually, he filled the space with his presence, his booming laugh, the sound of him dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. That day he was silent. He moved slowly, as if his bones ached. The confident set of his shoulders was gone, replaced by a weary slump. He carried with him the smell of the city, damp wool from his overcoat and the faint, exhaust-fume bitterness of a long day. But underneath it was that other smell. The sharp, metallic scent of fear Chloe had written about. He found me in the living room and sank into his recliner. The springs gave a long, mournful groan. He didn't turn on the television. He just sat there, staring at the blank screen, his face pale and drawn in the dim afternoon light. "John Allenby called me today," he said, his voice quiet and rough. John Allenby was his oldest friend and a silent partner in his business. He asked if everything was all right, if I needed to talk. My father rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of profound exhaustion. Said he'd been reading some things online. Rumors. People are talking, Anna. They're saying the business is failing. He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. The vultures are circling. I sat there, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch him, this man who had always seemed like a mountain to me, suddenly looking fragile, breakable. Chloe had done this. Her words, typed out in the quiet of her bedroom, had reached across the city and struck a blow at the very core of his identity. It got worse. A few days after that, my mother was at her weekly bridge game. She came home white-faced and trembling, her hands fluttering nervously at her throat. Margaret, a woman she'd considered a close friend for over 20 years, had pulled her aside. I was in the kitchen when my mother came in, her purse slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the linoleum floor. The sound was sharp and violent in the stillness. "She asked me about my health," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. She wrapped her arms around herself as if a sudden, icy wind had swept through the room. She said she'd read an article about brave women who suffer in silence. She said the descriptions, the symptoms, it sounded just like me. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a deep, wounded betrayal. "How could anyone know that, Anna? I never told anyone. Not even your father knows how bad it gets sometimes." I felt the lie I was carrying become a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I had to tell them. I couldn't protect them from this anymore. The poison was already seeping in, tainting everything. That night, I waited until Chloe was out. She'd been going out more and more, flush with the money she was making from her supporters. I found my parents in the living room. The air was stale, the comforting sense of our home replaced by an atmosphere of anxiety. I sat on the ottoman across from them, my hands twisting in my lap. The only light came from a single lamp, casting a small, warm pool in the otherwise dark room, making their faces look older, etched with worry. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice shaking. "There's something you need to see. Something I should have told you about sooner." I brought them my laptop and opened the link to the Gilded Cage. I didn't have to say anything else. I watched their faces as they read. I saw the initial confusion give way to dawning comprehension, then to a stark, gut-wrenching horror. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic clicking of the mouse as my father scrolled down, his breath coming in short, sharp hisses. My mother sat motionless, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. A single tear traced a glistening path down her cheek, stark and silver in the lamplight. She didn't make a sound. It was the quietest, most devastating expression of pain I had ever witnessed. When my father finally looked up from the screen, his face was a mask of cold fury. But underneath the anger, I saw something else, a profound and terrible hurt. The look in his eyes was one of utter bewilderment, the look of a man who has been stabbed in the back by someone he never would have imagined could hold a knife. "Sparrow," he read the pseudonym aloud, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for an answer I didn't want to give. "Who is Sparrow?" And I had to say the name. I had to speak the truth that would shatter the last remnants of our peace. "It's Chloe," I whispered into the crushing silence. "It's Chloe." The sound my father made was not a word. It was a groan of pure, unadulterated anguish that seemed to be ripped from the very center of his soul. My mother just closed her eyes, her porcelain smile, the one Chloe had written about with such disdain, finally, irrevocably cracking. The room felt suddenly cold, as if all the warmth had been sucked out into the night. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hall, its steady, ticking rhythm counting down the final seconds of the family we used to be. The next chapter of Chloe's story was about to unfold not on a screen, but right here, in the ruins of our living room. Chloe came home a little after 11. She walked in humming, a cheerful, carefree sound that died in her throat the moment she saw us. We were all still in the living room, sitting in the dark like statues in a museum of sorrow. The only light was the cold, blue glow of the laptop screen, which was still open on the coffee table, displaying her latest betrayal for all to see. The air was thick with a silence that was heavier than any sound, a silence full of rage and shattered trust. She froze in the doorway, her car keys jingling softly in her hand, the sound unnaturally loud. Her eyes darted from my father's stony face, to my mother's tear-streaked cheeks, to me. She saw the open laptop, and the last of her manufactured cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by that familiar, defiant hardness. She squared her shoulders, a silent preparation for battle. "What?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Is this an intervention?" My father rose slowly from his chair. He was a big man, and in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room, his shadow stretching long and menacing in the dim light. He walked over to the coffee table, and with one swift, violent movement, he slammed the laptop shut. The crack of the plastic was like a gunshot. My mother flinched. Chloe didn't even blink. "My paper empire," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word laced with ice. "That's what you called it. You stood in this house, you ate our food, you lived under the roof I have worked my entire life to keep over your head, and you sold our struggles to strangers for pocket money." "It's not for pocket money," Chloe shot back, her voice rising to meet his. "It's for me. It's the first thing I have ever done that is mine. The first time anyone has ever paid attention to what I have to say." "Pay attention?" my mother whispered, her voice fragile, like fine china about to shatter. She finally looked at Chloe, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it was almost unbearable to witness. "You told them about my illness, darling. My private, personal pain. You took that from me, and you sold it." The word "sold" hung in the air between them, ugly and obscene. "I told the truth." Chloe's voice cracked with a sudden, raw emotion. "You want to talk about secrets, Mom? We're a family built on secrets. You and your secret illness. Dad and his secret money problems. What about your other secrets? The ones you haven't even told Dad about yet." A new kind of silence fell over the room. It was sharp and cold, filled with a sudden, sickening dread. I looked at my mother. All the color had drained from her face. She looked terrified. My father turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is she talking about, Ellen?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with a new, uncertain fear. Chloe smiled. It was a terrible, triumphant smile, full of malice and a strange, desperate glee. She was holding her final, most devastating weapon, and she was about to use it. "Go on, Mom. Tell him. Or should I? I'm sure my readers would love a new chapter. I could call it The Matriarch's Firstborn. My father stared at my mother, his face a canvas of disbelief. "Ellen!" My mother began to shake her head, a small, desperate movement. Sobs started to rack her body, silent, convulsive shudders. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, her words addressed to my father but lost in the cavernous space between them. "I was always going to tell you." "Tell me what?" My father's voice was a roar, the sound of a man whose world was fracturing beneath his feet. Chloe stepped forward into the dim light, her eyes glittering. "When Mom was 19, she announced, her voice clear and steady, as if she were a narrator revealing the final, shocking twist. "Long before she met you, she had a baby. A little boy. She gave him up for adoption. Never told a soul. Not her parents, not her friends, and not her husband of 25 years. The world stopped. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the rain outside, it all vanished. There was only the ringing in my ears, and the sight of my father's face collapsing. He looked at my mother, not with anger, but with an expression of such profound, hollowed-out devastation that it felt like I was watching him die. He didn't say a word. He just turned, walked out of the living room, and I heard the front door open and then close with a soft, final click. My mother crumpled, folding in on herself on the sofa as if her bones had dissolved, her sobs finally finding voice, raw and ragged howls of grief and shame. And Chloe just stood there, in the middle of the wreckage she had created, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She had won. She had burned the whole house down. But as I looked at her, I didn't see a victor. I saw a lost, pathetic little girl, her face pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror at the true and terrible cost of being seen. The smell of our home was gone forever, replaced by the acrid, choking stench of smoke and ash. The aftermath was worse than the explosion. The days that followed were lived in a thick, gray fog of grief. My father didn't come home. He called me once, his voice a hollow echo of itself, coming from a motel room somewhere on the other side of town. He said he needed space. He said he didn't know who my mother was anymore. He didn't ask about Chloe. It was as if she no longer existed for him. My mother barely left her room. She kept the curtains drawn, living in a perpetual twilight. The grand, vibrant woman who had been the sun in our family's solar system had shrunk, becoming a pale, silent ghost who haunted the hallways of her own home. When I would bring her a tray of food, she would barely touch it. The house, once filled with the smells of baking and life, now smelled of dust and stale, recycled air. The silence was the worst part. It was an aggressive, suffocating presence, pressing in from all sides. The grandfather clock in the hall had stopped ticking. No one had remembered to wind it, and its silence was a constant, damning testament to our brokenness. And Chloe was gone. The morning after the terrible revelation, she had packed a bag and left. She didn't leave a note. She didn't say goodbye. She just vanished. But her digital ghost remained. A new post appeared on the Gilded Cage a few days later. It was Chapter 5, titled The High Cost of Truth. It was a rambling, self-pitying justification of her actions, painting herself as a tragic truth-teller, a martyr sacrificed on the altar of her family's hypocrisy. She wrote about the confrontation, twisting my father's pain into brutish anger and my mother's devastation into manipulative theatrics. She didn't mention the baby again. Even she, it seemed, understood that was a line from which there was no return. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Her readers, her faceless, anonymous enablers, called her brave. They sent her money. They cheered her on as she danced on our graves. I was the only one left to navigate the ruins. I paid the bills. I answered the phone, fielding concerned calls from friends and family who had heard whispers, who knew something was terribly wrong. I lied. I made excuses. I became the reluctant guardian of 100 new, ugly secrets. I felt a cold, hard anger taking root in my heart, an anger directed not just at Chloe, but at the fragility of it all, at the perfect family lie we had all, in our own ways, helped to maintain. About a month after she left, I found Chloe. It wasn't hard. She was staying in a cheap, extended-stay hotel about 45 minutes away, a place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that smelled of damp carpets and desperation. I found her room number and knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the empty, bleak hallway. When she opened the door, I barely recognized her. She was thin, her face gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She was wearing the same stained sweatshirt she'd had on 3 days ago, and her hair was a tangled mess. Her room was a disaster zone. Empty takeout containers, dirty clothes, an overflowing ashtray, even though she didn't smoke. The air was thick with the smells of stale cigarettes and unwashed laundry. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I want to understand," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why. Not the garbage you wrote online. The real reason." She stared at me for a long moment, then gave a short, bitter laugh and stepped aside, letting me in. She collapsed onto the unmade bed. I remained standing, not wanting to touch anything in the squalid little room. "You want the real reason?" she said, her voice laced with a weary, self-loathing sarcasm. "There is no grand, noble reason, Anna. I didn't do it to liberate us with the truth. I did it because I was drowning." She gestured around the room. "I have nothing. No talent, no ambition that ever stuck. You got the brains, the drive. You were the good one. Dad was the provider. Mom was the heart. What was I? I was just Chloe, the extra one, the one who was always a little disappointing." Her voice trembled, and for the first time, I heard not a monster, but my little sister. I was buried in debt. I was failing 2 classes at the community college. I had nothing, and all I could see was you all, floating along in this perfect little boat, and no one even noticed I was 100 feet under the water. So I found the one thing I had that was worth anything. Our secrets. Your secrets. And I sold them. Because I wanted to feel powerful. I wanted to feel important. And for a little while I did. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? The power. The importance. I broke everything. For nothing. She curled into a ball on the bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood there in that sad little room, and the anger I had been nursing for weeks just dissolved. It evaporated, leaving behind only a profound, bottomless sadness. She wasn't a monster. She was just weak and lost and selfish, and in her desperation, she had become cruel. She had torched our lives not out of pure malice, but out of a pathetic, hollow need to feel like she mattered. I didn't offer her comfort. I didn't tell her it would be okay, because it wouldn't. I couldn't fix what she had done. But I did something else. I walked over to the window and pulled open the grimy curtains. A sliver of pale, watery sunlight cut through the gloom. "Get up, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Go take a shower. We're going to clean this place up." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a solution. It was just a start. A recognition that she was my sister, and that we were both adrift in the wreckage she'd made, and that maybe, just maybe, the only way out was to start picking up one piece of trash at a time. My father still hasn't come home. My mother's smile is gone for good. I don't know if we'll ever be a family again, not in the way we were. The lie of the Sunday roast is dead. But as I stood there, watching my sister slowly, painfully pull herself up from the bed, I felt the first, tiny, fragile flicker of something new. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was a beginning. The beginning of a long, painful, and brutally honest truth.